Welcome to HFY Chronicles. At the sum of 1,000 subscribers, I'll post a special series just for you. Subscribe now. When the signal was first detected at the edge of what space is called the dead zone, nobody could determine how long it had been transmitting. The carrier wave and transponder ID were unlike any seen in common galactic communication, a ghostly whisper from a region of space where nothing was supposed to exist, let alone broadcast. The signal pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm, as if beckoning, as if waiting for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to answer its call. Most believed it was a trap. This was the first belief, and it remained the most common. After all, what else could possibly exist in that lifeless void? The dead zone had claimed countless ships and crews over millennia, swallowing them into its lightless depths without a trace. Only the desperate or the damned ventured near its borders, and even they kept a respectful distance. When the signal did not stop after several years, others theorized it might be a warning beacon of some sort. This belief gained traction among scientific communities, especially given the signal's location at the heart of the most feared region in charted space. Perhaps some ancient civilization had placed it there to mark a cosmic hazard even more dangerous than the dead zone itself. Some believed it was a treasure, not many. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but also full of graves. Those who chased treasures in forbidden places rarely returned to spend their fortunes. One such treasure believer was the captain of the heavily modified ore trawler, Defiance, none other than intergalactic treasure hunter Kade Voros, as cold and sharp as the void itself, springer of 1,000 traps, conqueror of 100 damned tombs, bedecked in treasure and accolades, and utterly without fear. The burly Sparovian sported an enormous sidearm of unknown provenance and a gaudy coat, blood red, bedecked in gold trim. His reputation preceded him across 17 star systems, and tales of his exploits were traded in every spaceport tavern, from the core worlds to the outer rim. "Captain, the signal's frequency shifted again," reported Lena Tao, his navigation officer. Her slender fingers danced across holographic controls as she analyzed the latest transmission. "It's the third time this month. Whatever's broadcasting, it's adapting." Kade stroked his scarred chin thoughtfully, his cybernetic eye whirring softly as it zoomed in on the holographic representation of the dead zone, floating above the command console. "Adapting to what, I wonder?" he mused, more to himself than to his crew. When he had first learned of the persistent signal that none other would dare approach, the temptation had been too much for him to resist, though the circumstances gave even him pause. The dead zone wasn't just dangerous, it was certain death. No ship that ventured beyond its borders had ever returned intact. Those few derelicts that occasionally drifted out were found with their crews frozen, their systems dead, as if the very essence of life and energy had been drained from them. "You're not seriously considering going in there, are you?" asked Dario Reeves, his security chief and oldest friend. The burly man's face was a map of concern as he studied Kade's expression. "Even you're not that crazy." Kade's laugh was like gravel in a tumbler. "That's exactly what they said about the Maw of Kronos, and we all remember how that turned out." He gestured to the ornate medallion hanging from his neck, a relic from that particular adventure that had made him famous throughout the quadrant. "The Maw didn't kill everything that entered it," Lena pointed out. "The dead zone does." "Everything has its exception," Kade replied, his voice dropping to a determined whisper. "And I intend to be the dead zone's." With his rough-and-tumble crew and adventuring fleet, he ventured toward the signal. The galaxy held its breath as he crossed into what was officially designated as prohibited space, but known to all as the dead zone, and charted his course for the depths of it, the first ship to do so intentionally in living memory. Even most of his devoted followers, the other ships in his fleet, and the most intrepid news media stopped at the border of the dead zone to wait for him at Terminus Station, the closest outpost to the pitch-black area. The night before departure, Terminus Station buzzed with a nervous energy. Crews drank and gambled with forced joviality, making toasts to adventures they privately believed would be their last. Kade moved among them, his confidence infectious, his charisma drawing them in despite their fears. "To the unknown," he declared, raising a glass of amber liquid that glowed in the dim light of the station's main lounge. "And to coming back to tell the tale." The crowd cheered, but Lena noticed the doubt in their eyes. She approached Kade later, when most had retired to their quarters. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "No treasure is worth—" It's not about the treasure, Kade interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Not entirely. Don't you want to know what's out there? What's been calling to us all these years? Lena studied him for a long moment. You've changed, Kade. The old you would have gone in guns blazing for the glory and the credits. He smiled, a genuine expression that rarely crossed his weathered features. Maybe I'm getting old. Maybe I want my last adventure to mean something. Last? Lena's eyes widened. You're not planning on... Figure of speech, he assured her, though something in his expression suggested otherwise. Get some rest. Tomorrow we make history. With only his camera operators and a skeleton crew all having said their goodbyes and being paid enough to live like kings should they survive, the Defiance entered an area of space far blacker than the rest, where not even stars twinkled. A haunting weight pressed down that chilled all of them, regardless of species, to the bone. The ship's engines strained against the void, their usual powerful hum reduced to a labored whine. The lights flickered, and the environmental systems struggled to maintain temperature. It was as if the very fabric of space resisted their presence. Power levels dropping, reported engineer Zora Malik from the engine room, her voice crackling over the comm. Whatever this place is, it's draining us. Compensate, Kade ordered, his eyes fixed on the view screen that showed nothing but absolute darkness. Reroute from non-essential systems. What counts as non-essential in a place that's trying to kill us, muttered Dario, checking his weapon for the third time in an hour. In a galaxy of trillions of sentients, all rules are bound to be broken, except one. Nobody inhabited the dead zone, and nobody went there, other than the occasional foray by emergency services and military forces to guide a vessel that had wandered in by mistake. This had been a universal truth for nearly 10,000 years, and nobody had forgotten the reason. Things died there, all things. Nothing grew and nothing lived. Even on ships with specialized hydroponics bays, plants died, rations stopped nourishing. If enough time passed in the dead zone, even fusion reactions and basic biology grew cold. The stars themselves were dead. No organism or machine had ever lived past a handful of days in the dead zone, though occasionally cold, inert remains had drifted out. If you returned quickly, your body and technology would eventually function normally. If you stayed too long, you never left alive. The atmosphere aboard the treasure trawler was tense and silent as days ticked by. All knew they were on borrowed time. None knew exactly how much time that was. Day 3, Lena recorded in the ship's log, her voice barely above a whisper. The hydroponics bay is failing. Plants are withering despite optimal conditions. Crew morale is deteriorating. Captain Voros maintains our course. The Defiance pushed deeper into the void, guided only by the faint signal that grew incrementally stronger with each passing hour. The ship's systems continued their slow decline, and the crew found themselves huddling together for warmth as the environmental controls faltered. We should turn back, Dario argued during a tense meeting in Kade's quarters. Whatever's out there, it's not worth all our lives. We're closer than anyone's ever been, Kade insisted, studying the signal's readings. Look at this pattern. It's changing, becoming more complex. It's responding to our presence. That's what worries me, Zora interjected. What if it's luring us in? Kade's expression hardened. We've come too far to turn back now. One more day. If we don't find the source by then, we'll reconsider. That night, as the crew tried to sleep despite the bone-deep chill that had settled into the ship, Lena found Kade on the observation deck, staring out at the nothingness. You're not telling us everything, she said. Not a question, but a statement. Kade was silent for a long moment. I've been having dreams, he finally admitted. Since we first detected the signal. Dreams of something ancient, something waiting. A premonition. A connection. He turned to face her, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly in the dimness. Whatever's out there, Lena, it's been waiting for someone to find it, for a long, long time. The voyage took several days at maximum burn, whereupon the fleet encountered, with shocking suddenness in the utter blackness, a pulsing blue orb. The orb was nestled in an array of advanced and mysterious energetically charged scaffolding, and just above what appeared to be a small, lit, glass-enclosed area. Sensors confirmed the orb was the source of the transmission. By all the stars, whispered Zora, her eyes wide as she stared at the view screen. It's beautiful. The orb pulsed with a light that seemed to push back the darkness of the dead zone, creating a sphere of normalcy in the otherwise lifeless void. Around it, the scaffolding hummed with energy, intricate patterns of light dancing along its surface in mesmerizing sequences. "Life signs?" Kade asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Lena checked her readings, then checked them again, disbelief evident in her expression. "Plants. Atmosphere, temperature, it's like a bubble of normal space in the middle of this death zone." "And something else," added Dario, pointing to a secondary reading. "Something's moving in there." The trawler stopped 10 kilometers distant from the orb and sent out a cautious light scan pulse. Immediately, the orb reacted, reorienting and broadcasting a signal that effortlessly took over the intercom system and displays aboard the Defiance. Herself a veteran of 100 treasure hunts and at least as many pitched battles, the Defiance was armored and shielded like a dreadnought, and packed to the gills with systems so advanced that even the flagships of stellar empires were put to shame, fueled in large part by the quixotic array of alien technologies from past treasure hunts stuffed into every nook and cranny. The broadcast bypassed all of these measures and hijacked all systems, effortlessly. A man stood in the image. Human. The sparse crew rippled with shock. The creatures of legend and whisper. None had ever seen a real human in the flesh, but all had heard, read, and watched enough about them to recognize one of the two legendary precursor species of the modern galaxy, the vanished creators of practically every baseline tech that modern life was based upon. The two species whose merged art was still the standard-bearer for what art could be. The one on screen looked middle-aged, but its eyes conveyed something ancient. "Hello, traveler. I bid you welcome. My name was Dr. Elias Montgomery. If you are here, you have probably followed my beacon's message. I ask for your indulgence as I tell my story. You are not in danger near the beacon." All aboard the fleet listened, rapt. They could tell the words were true. In some impossible-to-define way, all had felt the death aura of the dead zone fall away as they neared the beacon. The oppressive cold that had seeped into their bones began to recede, and the ship's systems stabilized for the first time in days. About 100 years before my time, humanity had its first contact with an alien species. Our fiction had always dreamed of and dreaded this moment in equal measure. We were advanced, but still in our fledgling state, and worried what we would find when they finally reached out. Our joy when the Alari were not only friendly but beautiful, cultured, artistic. It's hard to explain how glorious those days were. They uplifted everything in our society. Hunger and war were gone overnight. Transportation and pollution were solved. More than that, they made our art better, not just our science. They taught us new ways to make music, poetry, and film. Both of our species were intensely artistic, and as they entwined, those traits blossomed ever greater. As he spoke, images began to appear alongside his face. Breathtaking vistas of worlds none of them had ever seen, cities that gleamed with an architectural beauty that made their hearts ache, and beings of such grace and elegance that they could only be the Alari he spoke of. Tall, willowy creatures, with luminescent skin and eyes that seemed to hold galaxies within them. But even the Alari could not have imagined the depths of human ingenuity. They were a very long-lived species. In fact, between that, their beauty and their gentle nature, they were shockingly reminiscent of an artifact of human fiction, elves, to an extent that there were theories our species had known each other in some younger age. They lived about 800 years naturally. The images shifted to show humans and Alari working together, their differences complementing each other in ways that seemed to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Laboratories where they bent over complex equipment, concert halls where they performed together, and everyday scenes of the two species living in harmony. They never could have imagined we might outlive them. Their technology, with our understanding of our genome and our endlessly adaptive bodies, effectively eliminated aging. We could die whenever we chose. You would think everyone chose to live forever, but they did not. In fact, most stuck to the natural human lifespan, or added maybe 50 or 100 years. I was one that chose to live longer. I was one of the best scientists humanity had to offer, and my breakthrough physics work with the pioneering Alari scientist Dr. Lyria Navarine could not be allowed to fall by the wayside for something as petty as mortality. I started working with her when I was in my mid-50s, and during centuries of work together, we unlocked so many mysteries of the cosmos, and with practically no effort at all, we developed a love more powerful than anything I had ever imagined. She was the end of every sentence I started. She was the air in every breath I took. She still is. The image changed to show Dr. Montgomery and an Alari woman, presumably Dr. Navarine, standing before what appeared to be a massive scientific installation. Their posture spoke of intimacy and deep connection, even across species. The way they leaned toward each other, the way their hands almost touched, but didn't quite. It was a portrait of profound love that transcended physical differences. When I was about 500, Lyria about 600, the Exil attacked. You may or may not have heard of them. Either way, let me put your mind at ease. They aren't around anymore. The screen darkened and images of destruction replaced the earlier scenes of harmony. Massive ships like nothing the crew had ever seen, raining devastation upon worlds that had once been beautiful. Cities burning, people, both human and Alari, fleeing in terror. They were a voracious, impossible foe. The combined sciences of humanity and the Alari fought back with might, creativity, and raw power unseen since the universe formed. It wasn't enough. The details don't matter, but we were going to lose. Thousands of planets, trillions of happy, healthy, luminous beings, most already gone. The remainder pushed further and further back. Lena gasped as the images showed the fall of what must have been Earth and Alaria, the homeworlds of the two species. The devastation was complete, the destruction absolute. Tears streamed down her face, and she wasn't alone. Even Dario, hardened by years of combat, found himself moved by the tragedy unfolding before them. Lyria and I had turned our research into the nature of reality into something horrendous, searching for a way to stop them. We became the last bastion of both humanity and the Alari after Earth and Alaria fell. Our research facility was now massive and part military factory, guarded by the remaining scraps of the Allied fleets. We devised terrible weapons, relativistic railguns, mines that permanently shredded reality in haunting ways, many more things it would take ages to describe if I had any desire to do so, and all of them took a terrible toll on the Vizelts, but they kept coming. The images showed the two scientists working frantically, surrounded by the last remnants of their civilizations. The desperation in their movements was palpable, as was the determination. Our final gambit, which we had actually devised some years earlier but hoped never to use, was not a weapon that could be contained, not one that discriminated. It created the gulf you crossed to get here, a vast space. We called it the crime, because that's what it was. You already know what it does. It kills everything. A murder agent equally effective on biology and technology, a murder agent that snuffs out the fusion reactions of stars and stops everything from a mammalian heart to a spark striking off flint. It bends physics, time, and reality itself, permitting nothing to live. I will share no details on how it works or how it was developed. And we destroyed those records and all of our notes about a year after we deployed it and were sure it had worked. Kade felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold of the dead zone. The crime. The name fit. What else could you call something that killed stars themselves? We had fought the Gil a long time. We knew their ship speeds. We knew the location of their worlds. Most importantly, we knew three things: that they were a hive species with a queen, that their homeworld was within the volume the crime would encompass, and that their ships could not escape the volume in time for it to matter. Humanity and the Eolari used the last of our resources and ships to stage a final, massive attack on Zil space as a distraction to give us time pack a massive container, called the Time Capsule, with as much of our art, music, and history as we could. We launched it at the best speed our technology allowed, coated with the best stealth tech we had, and we waited until it had cleared the volume before we deployed the crime. We hope you found it. We did, murmured Kade, unaware he had spoken. Everyone knew the story of the pod. It had jump-started galactic civilization when it was found. It was the foundation of galactic culture. The tech of the pod had been a coup, but the art Morezo. It was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The art of the humans and the Alari. Art that eclipsed the art of all other species combined. Even more importantly, the pod had made clear the degree to which species could thrive in peace together, charting a course for peaceful political relationships between neighbor species. Most galactic historians divided history into pre- and post-pod. The crime worked. The Zil are gone. So are we. So are the Alari. So is everything else that lived in this part of the galaxy. Everything but this beacon. As Dr. Montgomery spoke, the images shifted to show the aftermath of the crime's deployment. A wave of nothingness spreading outward, consuming everything in its path. Stars winking out, planets going dark, life itself ceasing to exist across a vast swath of the galaxy. The crew of the Defiance watched in horrified silence, finally understanding the true nature of the dead zone they had dared to enter. I put everything I had into the design of this beacon while kYeah worked on the time capsule. It provided a tiny, safe zone, just enough space for kYeah and I to live in a humble apartment space with food, water, and plants. Not enough to save either species, not even enough space for anyone else, just enough space for us to live our lives together. And we did. In our little bubble of functional reality, surrounded for 1 trillion kilometers on all sides by pure death, we loved so brightly it put the stars to shame. We listened to the music of our cultures, watched the movies, danced the dances. We made love to the music of Mozart and kYeah alike. We lived as many aspects as we could, a lot of which you hopefully found jammed into her brilliant capsule. The screen showed their sanctuary, a modest living space filled with plants, books, and artifacts from both cultures. It was a tiny island of life in an ocean of death, preserved by technology so advanced it seemed like magic to the watching crew. They saw the two of them aging together, tending their small garden, dancing to music only they could hear, holding each other through the long years of their self-imposed exile. Zora wiped tears from her eyes. "They chose to stay behind," she whispered. "They could have escaped with the capsule, but they stayed." "Someone had to trigger the crime," Daria replied softly, "and someone had to bear witness." Kade said nothing, his expression unreadable as he watched the life of these two beings unfold before him, these representatives of legendary species whose sacrifice had shaped the very foundation of the galaxy he knew. She died when she was 805. Natural causes, after everything, it seems impossible. I buried her in the soil of our little station garden, per the tradition of her people. I've been alone here for about a year now, I think. I stopped keeping track of time. The image showed an elderly Dr. Montgomery kneeling beside a small plot of earth within their sanctuary, placing what appeared to be seeds or small flowers atop freshly turned soil. His face was lined with grief, but there was a peace there too, the peace of someone who had loved completely and was content with the life they had shared. "I think I'm ready to go. I've turned off my chrono implant. I will age rapidly and I will rejoin my kYeah. The station computer will plant me with her when I pass. It won't be long." For a moment, the human's composure broke, and the crew glimpsed the depth of his loneliness. A single tear tracked down his weathered cheek before he straightened, gathering himself for his final message. "This beacon will remain. One day you'll get close enough to pick up the signal, and its technology is beyond anything galactic society is ever likely to be able to harm or turn off. But on the off chance I'm wrong, I ask you humbly to leave it alone, convey its message, and depart this place in peace." Two species of impossible happiness and beauty stopped the advance of an unimaginable menace at the cost of everything. My love and I bore the pride of stopping them, but we also carried the impossible guilt of ending life itself for two species that loved life so much and killing anything else that ever ventures here. Lena looked at her readings, confirming what she already suspected. The beacon is still active. It's been broadcasting this message for thousands of years at least. "And maintaining that bubble of life," added Zora, her voice filled with wonder, "even after all this time." "If you're finding this," Dr. Montgomery continued, "we did all of this to give life a chance, so that people like our two species might exist again in peace and go on like our love, endlessly." The human's eyes seemed to look directly at them now, bridging the vast gulf of time that separated them. His voice grew softer, more intimate, as if he were speaking to each of them individually. "I can bear this weight no further alone. I miss her. Farewell. Please don't forget us." The transmission ended, but the beacon continued to pulse, its blue light a defiant spark against the all-consuming darkness of the dead zone. Silence reigned on the bridge of the Defiance. After enough silence, the skeleton crew and cameraman looked pensively at Kade. Both had seen him wade through rivers of blood, and both were stunned to see his normally sharp eyes glistening. They awaited orders to board and salvage. "Set our course out of the dead zone. Reunite us with the fleet." A shock rippled throughout the bridge. Rigging the ship for the dead zone and setting up media and plunder contracts had cost a tremendous amount. Leaving with nothing would hurt even Kade's fortunes. Besides, if the humans' words about the technology of the beacon were true, Even a small piece of that technology could set them up for life. Dario was the first to speak. "Captain, are you sure? The technology in that beacon is not ours to take," Kade interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "This isn't some ancient tomb filled with the treasures of a forgotten tyrant. This is something else entirely." Lena studied him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You knew, didn't you? Those dreams you mentioned. You knew what we would find here." Kade closed his eyes and nodded. "I knew something was calling to us, something important. I didn't know what until now." He opened his eyes, looking at each crew member in turn. "I know what you're thinking. Yes, it'll hurt. And yes, I've plundered tombs. I've looted from kings, emperors, and cities. I've done it happily. But I'll have no part of desecrating this place. This is the only place of life among eternal death. This is not a tomb of ego and power. They gave everything. They took the guilt and sacrifice of 2 species on themselves. This is a grave of heroes. Whatever it costs us, it cost them more." The crew exchanged glances, then nodded one by one. Even the cameraman, who had been hired specifically to document what they hoped would be the discovery of the century, lowered his equipment in silent agreement. "Before we go," Zora said hesitantly, would it be disrespectful to record the message, to share their story with the galaxy?" Kade considered this for a moment, then nodded. "I think they would want that. They didn't create this beacon to be forgotten. They wanted someone to find it, to understand what happened here. We'll take their message, but nothing else." The Defiance moved away, slow and somber in the void. As they retreated from the beacon, the ship's systems began to falter again, the cold of the dead zone seeping back into their bones. But they pushed on, guided by the memory of what they had witnessed. A testament to love and sacrifice that transcended species, time, and even death itself. The journey back was difficult. By the time they reached the edge of the dead zone, the Defiance was operating on minimal power and the crew was exhausted and half frozen. But they made it. The waiting fleet greeted them with cheers and celebrations that quickly turned to stunned silence as Kade shared what they had discovered. News of their discovery spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The recording of Dr. Montgomery's message was viewed by trillions, sparking a renaissance of interest in the legendary humans and Alari. Scholars pored over the contents of the time capsule with renewed vigor, finding new meaning in the art and technology that had shaped their civilization. All species still avoid the dead zone, but none call it that anymore, after Kade made the meaning of the transmission clear, right before he retired from his adventuring career and returned to his home and family forever. They now call this dead area of space the Gift. Museums and memorials were established to honor the sacrifice of the 2 precursor species. Children across the galaxy learned the story of Dr. Montgomery and Dr. Navarine, whose love had been strong enough to survive the end of their worlds and whose sacrifice had ensured the continuation of life itself. Kade Voros, once the most notorious treasure hunter in the galaxy, became known for something else entirely, the man who found the truth of the Gift and chose to leave it undisturbed. He declined all offers to lead expeditions back to the beacon, instead using his considerable influence to establish a protected zone around it, ensuring that no one would disturb the final resting place of humanity and the Alari. In the years that followed, Kade would sometimes stand at the viewport of his modest home on a distant moon, gazing in the direction of the Gift, wondering about the 2 beings who had loved so deeply and sacrificed so much. He had encountered many treasures in his long career, but none had affected him as profoundly as the beacon and its message. In the blackness of space, rendered as still and cold as death itself, a small apartment remains lit. A pair of small trees still grow in the station garden, dutifully trimmed, watered, fed and monitored by the station's systems. Above the apartment, a last bright beacon still glows, pushing back the darkness. This is the grave of humankind and Alarikind alike. It continues to pulse its message of love and sacrifice by 2 species and by 2 souls. And sometimes, on the clearest of nights, when the stars align just so, sensitive instruments throughout the galaxy pick up faint echoes of that signal, a reminder of what was lost, what was saved, and what might yet be possible when different species come together in love and common purpose. The Gift remains, eternal in its vigil, a blue star in a sea of darkness, a testament to the enduring power of love against the void. As the final notes of this tale echo in your mind, I invite you to join me on more journeys through the stars and beyond. If this story of sacrifice, love, and the enduring beacon of hope touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who appreciate the deeper meanings hidden in the vastness of space. Subscribe to my channel for more original stories that explore the boundaries of imagination. And don't forget to turn on that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when new adventures await. Your support fuels these cosmic explorations, and every comment you leave helps shape the universe we're building together. Until our next voyage among the stars, remember the lesson of the gift, that even in the darkest void, love can create a light that shines eternal. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.